Now that we have our project directories all set up and we've created our MySQL database, we're ready to start building the foundations of our object-oriented project, the photo gallery. And we're going to start doing that by taking a look at the MySQL database class. The idea here is to take everything we learned about connecting to databases from the essential training and apply what we've learned about object-oriented programming to it. Let's start by taking a look at those steps that we learned in the essential training. The very first step is that we'll require the config file that has those constants defined in it. And then we have 5 basic steps. We're going to create a database connection, select the database we want to use, then perform the database query, use the return data from that query, and then close the connection. Steps 1, 2, and 5 will be the same for our entire project. It's really steps 3 and 4 that will vary from page to page. And we saw that also in the essential training. Now let's see how we can put these into an object. I'm going to start by creating a new file, and we're going to save it in our includes directory as database.php. And let's just open this up a little bigger, and we'll just put it over here so that we can see both at once. Now, we know that we still are going to want to do this require, right? That hasn't changed at all. And that'll happen even before we define our class, which will be MySQL database. Now, you might be wondering why I went ahead and called it MySQL database and not just simply database. Well, we could. But my thinking here is that if we had a different class for every database, then it would be really easy for us to swap out databases. So let's go ahead and when we're done, we're going to instantiate database equals new MySQL database. That's the idea. That's what we're going for here. And that way, database is ready to go, ready for me to use. As soon as this file is done, it will not only define the class, but create a new database and assign it to database. And if I, for example, want to change it someday, I can have another one that is my Oracle database, or another one that is my MS SQL database, for example. But for now, we're just going to use MySQL, but we already have that sort of modularity built in. And we could even have something that looks in a config file to decide which one of my database adapters should I use. So I think this is just a good programming technique. Now let's start by taking step 1 here, and let's think about how we could put that into our object. I'll just copy it. And we're going to need to put it inside a method, right? So let's go ahead and say function, and let's call it simply open connection. And let's paste all of that we just had in there. We don't need this 1 anymore. And I'll go ahead and move this over and expand it a little bit so we can see a little better. There we go. So now we should be able to call database open connection, and it would open the connection for us. That's what we're going for. So this has got to be a public function. We saw that. And there's a couple more things we need to do, though, because just opening the connection doesn't do much. This sets a local variable connection equal to the connection, but then we don't have access to it. So this is where we're going to need our attributes. So let's say we're going to have an attribute here. We'll make it private, and we'll call it connection. And that is where we will store our connection. So we know then that we have to change these to refer to the instance variable, this connection. So now it will create the connection for us and then assign it to that attribute. So now whenever we want to talk about the connection, we can refer to it as database connection and then do whatever we want with that connection, except that it's private. So we're going to need another way to access it. The same idea as the bank vault and the bank teller that we talked about. But we've done a good thing by storing it because now it's part of the object and that connection is held on to. Now you may be thinking, isn't there an easier way to do these 2 steps, right? I mean, we learned about the construct method, and sure enough, if we do function construct, we can open the connection automatically. So now we don't even need this step. As soon as we create the database object, it creates the connection for us. So we can already start to see how we're going to put all of these database connection parts into our object. Let's fold these up, and now let's try creating another one here for public function close connection. And that should be obvious enough. We'll just come down here and grab these from step 5. And of course, we're not looking at just connection anymore. Now we're looking at this connection, the attribute. So there we are. Now we've brought in close connection. So that's all there really is to taking those kinds of functions and putting them into an object. And now we have the ability, if we wanted to say database, close connection, now it will open the connection when it creates it, then in the next step it will close it. And it will still be able to find the connection because it's held in that instance variable. Now before we leave this, once we open the connection, we also know that we're always going to want to do this step 2 here. That's going to happen every time. So let's go ahead and copy that, and let's go ahead and perform that at the same time. I'm going to put it in an else statement. So if there's no connection, then die. But if there is a connection, then go ahead and select the database. This connection, right? I'll just need to make that little change. And if there's not a database selected, then die also. But if there is, then just keep going. So now we have both our open and our close connections. I'm going to go ahead and take this out because we don't want to close it. We're going to want to keep it open because now this is available to us. All we need to do is refer to the object database on any page that has included this database.php file, and we have full access to our database. You may want to call this just DB. That's very common. Or we also saw that you could do DB equals and database, and that will point it to the reference. And you could also refer to that same MySQL database object by just using DB. I'm going to use database all the time, but I'll go ahead and leave it there just so that you have it. In the next movie, we'll continue building our database class by looking at how we can put in step 3.